So thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much for this introduction. It's so pleasant to get introduction from somebody who knows you and who kind of seen what you've been doing for 30 years. As some of us get older, we value old friendships, old connections, old contexts becomes, more and more valuable. I don't know about you, but maybe approximately 10 or 7 years, maybe 10 or 8 years ago, I remember having this feeling where once in a while I would wake up in New York and kind of like look outside and open Facebook or just open the news and having this feeling that I'm on a different planet. That everything I grew up with, 20th century, modernity, the struggles between totalitarianism and democracy, and the wonderful work of modern artists, writers, composers, architects, designers, and thinkers, and the values, which I grew up with, and the values which are, because I did grow up with values, I thought I took for granted, I thought they were obvious: complexity, nuance, contradiction, contrast, the ability to hold multiple contradictory ideas in one's head, the pleasure of debate, the pleasure of, making, let's say, opposing somebody in conversation, but not for the sake of shutting this person down, but just for the sake of playing a devil's advocate, the subtlety, nuance, and so on, the values which sometimes today, looking back, we associate with modernism and modernity. Everything I took for granted is no longer can be taken for granted. And, forgive me if I may sound a bit pessimistic or maybe less optimistic than it's fashionable, but I think we live simultaneously in a wonderful age, which is a combination of Renaissance and Middle Ages at the same time, right? On the one hand, never before, humans lived as well because of informational global capitalism. Billions of people in the last 35 years have been brought up from extreme poverty to middle class. We can debate, whether it's a accurate definition or not, but according to economists, something like 55 or 60% of people on this planet now live in middle class, and 30 years ago it was, maybe, 15%. Of course, lots of it is because of developments in China and also in Asia, but it is a global development. We have lots of local wars, right, and some awful conflicts, as what is happening now. But we didn't have world wars for a while now. And if you look at practically every possible metric, education, women rights, children mortality, dozens of social economic metrics, humans have never lived so well. I mean, today, the average human in dozens of countries lives better than a king a few hundred years ago, right? Or even member of aristocracy 200 years ago. So progress in human, social and economic development has been amazing, but whether we can talk about any progress in culture, or whether this metric even applies to culture, right, is hard to say. And it seems to me that, the works of thousands of years ago, whether it is ancient Greece or, or ancient China or ancient Japan or ancient Middle East, are as contemporary. And some months ago, I started to read a novel, which is basically the first literary text, the first novel written in Japan. And it was written by the lady who was serving in court. So she was around 30, probably, late 20s. And it was written around 1990, so 1990 BC. So that's, 1,200 years ago. And I'm reading this novel, and I feel completely like your contemporary. In fact, I felt more at home reading this novel than most of the stuff which surrounds me on social media today. So, so this is my introduction, which actually has nothing to do with what I'm going to say to show, but this is to simply kind of celebrate, old connections, old friends, and thanks for inviting me, and I'm glad to see some of these old friends here. So what I'll do in my presentation is going to be a bit unusual, and maybe different from what some people expect. As Marco mentioned, I am also a practicing artist, in addition to being a scholar. In fact, I do think of myself as an artist who simply chose the medium of university and the medium of academic publication as his artistic media. In my late 20s, I looked around and I was a bit terrified of the art world because, it has all kinds of people. Of course, there are different art worlds, but nevertheless, today, especially with, digital art becoming so popular and the NFT boom, so many people who normally you would never want to talk to have entered this world. And, to get a PhD, you have to pass a certain number of doors, a certain number of portals. In the academic world, it can be boring, it can be cliquey, it can be bureaucratic, but you do deal with doubts. And my own experience, and again, I'm making some generalizations, but in my own experience, when I deal with setting up exhibitions and other art world activities, sometimes I feel I'm dealing with 5-year-olds, right? People who are temperamental, unprofessional, slow, extremely egocentric. And this is, again, this is my own experience. I hope your experience is better. That's why in my late 90s, I decided, I will be artist, but instead of making artworks and exhibiting them in Kunsthalles, museums, art centers, and so on, I will get a PhD and I'll be kind of publishing articles because this is the most direct path from my brain, from my mind to the reader. And then I realized, so I got a PhD, right? And I got the job, but my job was teaching art, which was very contradictory, right? But kind of perfect. I was teaching art for 20 years before I came to New York. But when it came to evaluations, right, they actually would evaluate me for my writings. So maybe it was crazy, or maybe it was perfect. I'm not sure. But because I was in the art department, like I was able to do whatever I want, which is to write about this thing called the media, which also became a skills about writing anything I want, since new media, or rather the intersections between computers and culture, touch upon so many different fields: architecture, design, writing, theater, design, fashion. So I was able to touch upon all these fields as well in my work. But then I realized, that if you, as a writer, there's still like intermediaries between you and the public, right? Because the thing which I did like personally about being an artist is you have to get, especially in these days, you have to get computers or equipment, right? You have to work. You have to work with curators who have their own ideas and who kind of try to use your art as a way to develop their own careers. And then there are your writers or critics who don't understand anything. And then your work is installed and it doesn't work. So I thought this is too much, right? But I found out that in the academy there are also certain gatekeepers and also certain steps that you send the article to the journal, you send it to the reviewers for people in the field, and these reviewers are going to take a few months to read it. And then there's always going to be one person who will not understand it and ask for some ridiculous changes. And then you have to change it. And it can take months, right, to publish an article. So I thought this is still too long. I need to get to my audience faster, right? This is too much. So when I got my PhD, it was fall of '93. I had my first teaching job, and somebody showed me the World Wide Web, right? Because the Mosaic, the first graphical browser, just appeared around this time. So it was fall of '93, and I said, "Aha!" It was being from Soviet Union, where information was completely controlled by government, and no Western books were published unless they were from the authors who were friendly to the communism of the Soviet Union. We all read text which was circulating in handwritten copies or the typewriter copies. It was called samizdat. And when I saw internet, when I saw the web, I said, aha, I have my semis done. Here's my network ready for me, and I can sort of get to my audience, so to fellow artists, fellow participants in the media journey faster. So I went home. I made first a web page, spring of '94, and then everything I was writing, I would put on my web page. And then '95, '96, people started a couple of online mailing lists. That time in Rhizome, there are some people here who know them and who played or maybe still playing active role in this mailing list. So I started putting my articles where I would write an article, I would break it into 3 parts and like 1,500 words, and I would put it right in this mailing list, and then people would read it. And it was a wonderful way to exist. And it made sense because at this point, believe it or not, 30 years ago, the number of people who understood that computers were going to change the culture dramatically, including visual culture, was just a few people. So in terms of this thing, which I think I was a part of, which I helped to develop, like the group of us, so-called new media theorists, I mean, we're also wonderful writers for the audience who would write things, but your primary activity was making projects, because my primary activity was writing about this project. Was literally like 5, 6, 7 people, which is a tiny group. And then you can say, Lev, but how did you become like distinguished professor? Like, how did you manage to right, kind of to bypass, to kind of both be in the system and subvert the system, right? So you're saying you never send, I feel like I have 190 articles, and only maybe my first one I sent to a peer-reviewed journal. I mean, I sent some 10 years ago when I had graduate students, but there was more conferences. But I basically, out of 190 articles, I only sent a couple to peer-reviewed journals, but that's what you need to get promotions at the university. So people would see my articles on, my website on that time in Rhizome, and because almost nobody else, was just a few people doing this kind of writing, 30, even 20 years ago, we would say, oh, great, Lev, can we put our article in our journal? Can we put your article in our, Cambridge University anthology, et cetera, et cetera. So then 2 or 3 years later, right, by the time the promotion time was up, and I had to show my published research, I said, look, here's all my articles, so they come out in all the journals, especially issues, or in all these anthologies, and everything was fine. So this is a bit of a kind of personal history. So now let me share the screen. So what I actually want to do, this is all introduction. Sorry, I didn't mean to plan to say any of it, but I can see some old friends and most people and everybody else who is young. Just wanted to recall a bit of his history, and maybe there is a bit of a message here also for students, that you can always find your own unique way to do things. It's always possible, even today, when we do feel maybe that there are millions of cultural programs, where millions of people using digital tools, and AI can generate billions of images in one evening. You still try to find your own way of functioning, not only your own content, not only your own aesthetics, not only your voice and your message, but perhaps your own unique way of existing. Okay, let's share the screen. Here we go. Okay, so I will be using, so I'll be showing kind of images, my own artworks. First, I'll show you some things which I did like 45 to 35 years ago in the late 70s and early 80s. And then mostly I'll be showing and commenting and discussing like a recent work. So I use Lightroom to basically, edit my AI images, the images which I generate in Midjourney. So I have, 10 or 12,000 images here. And then recently I made a website, just to kind of highlight, just so people can find these images, right? I still have my main website, which I had in different forms since '94, so it's almost 30 years. So Manovich.net, and you can get my articles and my books, etc., etc. And also my older digital art projects. And this is also, you'll find my most recent writing. So it's this book called Artificial Aesthetics. It is ongoing investigation into the, let's say, impact of generative media on culture, especially visual culture and visual arts, and the concept of aesthetics. And it's a collaboration with my friend and colleague, who is a professor in the leading art design fashion academy in Berlin. In Venice. He's Italian, he lives in Berlin. So his background is kind of philosophical aesthetics, philosophy, experimental psychology. And my background is also experimental psychology, art design, media, programming. So we're kind of publishing these books, and there's going to be 3 more books coming, hopefully before the end of the year, and then we'll close it. So I'm going to add like another chapter, hopefully next week. And then, because with my stuff, my main website has so much stuff, I created a separate one with very kind of vulgar name, right? Manovich Art. And I'll start by showing you maybe something which maybe nobody has seen it, which is my sort of examples of the kind of artwork I made in my late teens and early 20s. In fact, let me start maybe here. We start here. Just a second. Okay, maybe here. Yeah. Okay, maybe it's actually a bit easier to see. Yes, perfect. Yeah. Okay. So this is basically, I had classical training as a teenager. In order to be accepted into Moscow Architecture School, I spent 2 years being trained by actually the best kind of classical drawing teacher in Moscow. So I got trained in the classical 19th century techniques. And then this is the drawing which I did. I don't remember, it was 17 or 18. So it was Moscow. It was still before climate change. So it was very cold. I remember that. And this is drawing I made from nature using technical pen. I still use technical pen on paper. I like it because the lines you can make just has like one width. So I like this limitation. And I remember sitting on a tiny chair in the park, maybe 10-minute walk or 5-minute walk from our apartment. And I think I spent around 18 hours in a few sessions making this drawing. And what fascinated me about this space of late winter, early spring, and this remained a fascination and a kind of obsession until today, is that the space, right, made from these bare trees and branches, right, it's not like a field space. So it's kind of different, let's say, from the space as defined by early computer graphics, which I already got exposed to shortly after arriving to New York in 1982. And then I started to work with 3D computer animation in 1994. So it's also been now 40 years working in digital media, right? So in computer animation and computer graphics, at that time, right, the space is defined through polygons and solids. So you have this empty Cartesian space, coordinates, even you put objects. But here, right, what you have is a space, in a way, it's kind of porous, right? It's made of densities. And this is what I try to represent. This was done a few years earlier, right? So I think I was 17 or 18. And as I said, right, I try to kind of blur a bit and dissolve in the aerial perspective these trees and these branches, make them less solid. So you can say it's a bit impressionistic, but I was interested, right, not in colors, but rather in lines. So this belongs also to a tradition, which is now is a bit forgotten as a term, but the tradition of graphic arts, right? You could say line art, and everything is made from its different densities. And of course, what I was also really interested is a mood and particular feeling. Now, as soon as I left Soviet Union, so immigrated in 1981, I had was extremely stressful. I was trying to figure out where I was. We arrived in New York a few months later. In 1982, I went to New York University, but also I think my brain was kind of processing what was going on, and I started to make drawings or works on paper, different media, which would symbolically represent, let's say, my experience of living in the late communist empire, of living in the Soviet Union, and you'll see, some of these drawings. So, for example, maybe we don't need this. Yeah, maybe something like this, right? And again, I don't have dates, so I don't know exactly if this was made like 81, 82, 84, 86. So it's yet another way in which my past is lost. Like I don't know exactly when I did it, but all I know is I did it, I think, in my first part of my 20s. So to recognize this kind of familiar iconology, right? Familiar references from this ongoing quest towards the perfect utopian society. Maybe some of you know this, the famous novel Katlavan by Platonov. So this idea that there is this ongoing, never-ending construction. In fact, this beautiful park, which I drew as a teenager, where I used to go for walks, as a teenager, as a child, it was destroyed as we were living, and it was turned into this construction site, and you have this kind of like pieces of stuff lying around. You may also think of association with scenes in, I think, Tarkovsky Stalker, where the scenes where the camera kind of pans over shallow water, and in the water you have stuff, right? You have this archaeology, you have this remains of modern civilization, kind of pieces of TVs and old bulky phones and cables and pieces of cloth. Anyway, this is what came out from me. But I think what's also interesting, so again, pen and paper, I think what's also interesting is that it's also a stage, right? So if you look at that space, the space is organized, right? There's a kind of two planes. So you have a flat plane, right? And then you have the plane behind, so it's like a theater stage. And you notice that you don't have horizon, right? So instead of horizon, the horizon is closed off, right? So you have this back plane, back wall, and in fact, both the back wall and the ceiling are covered, in this case, with some kind of cloth. The cloth has been held by wooden poles. And this is, I think, both visually and metaphorically was my feeling, right, of living, let's say communism, quote unquote, in this civilization where you constantly pretending, right? The moment you leave home, you pretend, you say particular things you're supposed to say, you raise your hand to vote for everything. And you can only, take off this mask when you're at home with your family, or maybe you are with your friends. But because your kind of the stage now has been around for decades, right? So in the late 70s, if you count from the days of revolution, 1917, we're talking about, like 50 years, this stage, this a kind of artificial schematic reality has become, right, very textured, very old, like a decoration which became life. And then, now again, I look back at my drawings, right, from 40-year distance, and I see these motifs, right? So here's another drawing. Again, you have this kind of flat surface. You have these houses, but they're not real houses. They're almost like decorations of houses, and road and trees and that strange shoe hanging from a back wall, and some kind of bird or a sign of a bird on a string suspended from a telegraph pole, and so on and so forth, right? I'll just show you some more. I've also done other things, but just to show you drawings, from this particular, in this particular modality, right? So something like this is, small painting, a bit different. And then, let's say, something like this. Something like this. Something like this. Okay, so this is, we got another version, right? Maybe the same motif. So here again, you can see this reality made from these parts, and some interesting reverse perspective, and things are kind of two-dimensional. So this is a reference to a famous kind of Potemkin village. And again, right, this dialectic between reality and its sign, between reality and the stage, the reality in the theater. And I was very naive, right? Because there was no internet and we had no knowledge, right, of the West. So when I arrived to New York, I thought, well, here I am, I arrived in the free democratic capitalist society. And, here people will be saying what we actually think and behaving in a way, which doing what we want to do, as long as we're allowed to do it economically. And to a certain extent, of course, it was like this, right? So the difference between, the Soviet Union and this kind of theater stage world and the world of wild, dangerous, but kind of free New York of the 80s and 90s was a big difference. But then, of course, I also realized, we all live in societies. So it doesn't matter what society we live in. We do pretend from time to time to achieve certain goals. We don't always say what we think, maybe because we don't want to maybe tell our friend that we think our friend didn't behave in a particular way. But I also found that in the last 10 years, and of course this is not just my observation, this is documented by social scientists, there are quantitative studies, and there's articles in Atlantic, New York Times, Washington Post, or Le Monde. The Western world, in some ways, became a bit more like this communist world of belief, pretense, and ideology, which I experienced as a child, a teenager, especially in the last 5 years, although there are some signs that it's now changing. And it is, very, very strange and very surreal to me. Anyway, so just a few things. And then, I basically did this is, piece of etching I did, right? So I also try to do things in different media. And then, again, same kind of motif. So this is actually a color drawing, which was done using magic marker. But recently, I photographed all these drawings and I started to edit them in Lightroom, applying different photographic effects, so I can make it black and white. And then, this is the full etching. So this was like the first etching I ever did when I took etching class at the age of 23. And again, you can see that we have somewhat of a similar thing going on, right? So for inhabitants of this world, it appears as the reality, but we can see being outside, right? The outside observer, the world is limited, the world is flat. And in fact, this flatness is emphasized by the fact that the surface is bending, but people who live in this world, we don't know about it, right? Anyway, so, I can show you more and more things. Obviously, I've done thousands of drawings and paintings. So just showing you a few things, so you see kind of where I started. I think that's probably enough. So then, I think the last time I did some drawing and painting was around 1989 or 1990. So then I had a gap for, 32 years. I'm doing digital media and doing all these things which Marco mentioned. But then during COVID, me and my wife, we're staying in Korea. We haven't traveled for 2.5 years. And while I was doing many talks on Zoom, I think I felt a certain separation from the world. And after some thinking about kind of what I want to do next, what I don't want to do, and saying, okay, Lev, maybe you don't need to be with Lev Manovich, this person who started all these things and published 190 articles and did 15 books, maybe that's enough. Maybe you could do something else. Now I think it's not enough, right? But at that point I was thinking, and I said, okay, maybe I can actually go back to art making. Of course, during this period, this 33 years, I did a number of digital art projects and we were shown in many exhibitions, but they were always closely connected, right, to my ideas, to my theoretical thinking. Sometimes the project would come before and then the writing would come later. Sometimes the writing would come first and then the project would come later. And I said, well, maybe I want to try to go back, and I want to go back to this moment, when I kind of stopped, drawing, right? And to go back to 1990, this is also a kind of drawing from this period, right? A particularly complex, let's say, multi-level, a kind of meta world, but also the person is reality, right? Which is the stage, and then here's some cleaning woman, also have the strings, which can be pulled to control his reality, and then this whole thing, of course, is inside the box. So it's also a theater, a model for somebody else, right? This kind of solipsistic world. Maybe I can come back to it. So I started drawing again. This was like the first drawing I did. Not so interesting, not so great, but I was just happy to, that I go to art store and kind of buy all these beautiful supplies and beautiful notebooks and pens. And I have it all here. And then, I said, okay, let me work on the second drawing. So it was the second drawing I did, which I feel was more interesting. And then 2 weeks later, Midjourney came out, or rather, Midjourney was already available since February of 2022 to limited beta testing, but in July of last year, it was open to everybody. So this revolution, yet another digital revolution, which we're living now, called generative media, kind of went, right, started. And of course, right, huge things happen in this 15, 16 months. So November, we got ChatGPT, and just in the last few weeks, we got DALL-E 3. We now have AI in Bing. We have, in fact, generative media built right into the search. So if you enable it in Google search, and when you search, in addition to search listings, you get generative media summaries, etc., etc. And of course, animation tools are progressing, and it is clear, we are living through yet another major computer culture revolution. Many people compare it to the emergence of the web 30 years ago. I think that's a good comparison. People also compare it to the development of photography 200 years ago. It's also a good comparison. And I think we are really much in the beginning. So, so when I saw it, I said, okay, well, I'm going to use, right, these new computer tools and try drawing parallel and kind of see where it goes. So as a result, I will go back to the screen. As a result, between July of last year and now end of October this year, what do I got? Well, I have about 5 or 6 drawings, because it takes a really long time to draw. It takes me maybe, because I'm still like remembering how to draw, and I draw, right, in this very kind of small scale, very detailed, very anal way, which is the result of my classical training and can damage me. Like, I can't really do this. I can only do this. So it takes me, 40, 50 hours to make one drawing. So I have 7 or 8 drawings, so 5 or 6 drawings. And I have 16,000 Midjourney images. And now I'm preparing 2 solo exhibitions, which will show both. So one will open in 3 weeks in Portugal and will be on for 6 months. It's called Unreliable Memory. And the second exhibition will open in Seoul in the December 20th. I don't know how long it will be for, but didn't tell me, but the exhibition will be called Memory Draw. So what I want to do next is to show you some of these images and comment. So these images, which I'll show you, some of them are purely experiments. So some of them are indeed connected, I think, to my attempts to understand theoretically what is this new media, what is generative media, how it is similar or different from all the previous media, from all the previous new media. But you can read more about it in my book. And I think our images are purely, let's say, poetic, lyrical, aesthetic explorations, where I treat AI as having hundreds of thousands of art assistants, but we're very strange assistants, right? Because normally you hire an assistant, you pay this person money, maybe from a grant, or you pay this person yourself, and the assistant more or less does what you want them to do. But the AI assistant, so to speak, is very different because it has ideas of its own. And there are different reasons for this. But one of the reasons is that the basic, so here I will put my theoretical hat for like 2 minutes before I show you the actual images I'm making. So to me, the single biggest problem and a challenge of working with generative media is that there is a kind of Achilles heel with a basic limitation or basic characteristic common to statistics, starting in the 18th century, when it goes through history of statistics and statistical tools, even data science, which emerges as a new discipline, let's say in the late 2000s, and not all, but lots of data visualization, and also AI and machine learning. That is, all these tools and all these methods are designed to pick up, to show, to represent, to learn, to visualize what is more common. So in the case of supervised machine learning, right, you give a network data set, which can be trillions of web pages or all the books have been written and digitized. Or in the case of visual AI, you can give it, 800 or 700 million image and text pairs in the case of Midjourney, or approximately 5 billion image and text pairs in the case of Stable Diffusion. And it's a lot, but it's not structured, right? Data set, it's something which is just kind of more or less randomly, opportunistically, right, downloaded from a web. And of course, web does not represent all possibilities of human creativity, human imagination, or human culture equally, right? There's maybe like too many photographs of cats, not enough photographs of something else, right? And, of course, there are also gender biases and race biases, ethnicity biases, age biases, but there are also biases in representation. So this is what happens, right? When the systems learn from this wild, unlabeled sort of, right, data sets, they learn these biases, or more specifically, I don't like the word bias, right? Because you can call everything a bias, it's no longer interesting. It's like postmodernism. When you start calling everything a bias, it's no longer a useful term. You simply learn things which are more frequent in the data, right? So when I tell Midjourney or Stable Diffusion, okay, make a tree, it makes a tree, but let's say the branches look too generic, too common, and the same thing happens with clouds, and the same thing happens with everything. So this is why, for me, who has this, right, 50 years of background in visual arts, and I show them my early images, not because they're like good art or great art or bad art. I mean, they're pretty okay, but they're kind of different from what we see today, because of just 50 years have passed or 40 years have passed, and I want to create images with AI or films with AI. Doesn't matter. We don't have to be great. We don't have to be completely original, but I just don't want to have like a very common way of drawing trees or a very common way of representing cloud. I want something a bit more peculiar. I want something which is more close to my visual aesthetic. And this is a struggle. So what I'll show you is just examples of my various image series. I call them series because when I find a particular area of latent space, like I sometimes generate hundreds of images in one evening or over a few weeks. So I always work in series, and I will comment a bit on what I see is perhaps, well, or actually not perhaps, what I see is, for me personally, as the main challenge, limitation, but also challenge of working with this media. I mean, every media has its own challenge, right? I mean, photography has its own limitations. I mean, oil painting has its own limitations and affordances, right? So AI media, like every other media, has its own affordances and limitations, which is its amazing ability to represent things using thousands of different styles, or at least resemblances of different styles, right? Different artists, designers, and so on. My ability to create concepts, my ability to present things which don't exist, right? It's amazing computational capacities, but it's also the fact that it's much easier for it to represent something which is more familiar, something which corresponds to a kind of common sense, to the kind of common bourgeois, let's say middle class way of understanding things. It's in a way decreasing over time capacity to create something more, I don't know, more subtle. But I think it also depends on your taste. So let me show you some examples. Okay. And in order to make this go faster, so we have time for questions, I will actually switch to my website. This has less stuff. Okay. So this is a series called The Garden. There is no concept here. It's not about anything. Although I guess I am becoming interested in the kind of history of gardens, something which I neglected. As you know, there was a kind of French garden tradition where gardens are very formal, very complex, very symmetrical, even British gardens of the 18th century, which are more wild. And having just spent 12 days traveling by car in the south of France and Provence, I really got to appreciate the French tradition. And then putting some characters, but to be honest, I'm actually not interested in the characters. But what I found peculiarly, in a strange way, when I use Midjourney, in order to get a particular space, a particular quality of space, if I simply describe a space in a prompt, often it doesn't come out. So to get the space, I have to specify certain characters, but the characters really of no interest to me. As you saw from my early drawings and works on paper, I'm just interested in the stage. So I think of my art as scenography, right? A design of stages for a non-existent, unwritten, perhaps impossible place. Of course, there's also interest here in drawing, in particular texture, particular nuance. And what I do is that sometimes I leave images as they are, but most often I load them into a Lightroom and I do a bit of modifications. So I'm actually, and of course, when I use Lightroom, right, it means I'm using another AI. So in fact, you have multiple AIs because let's say, for example, choose some image, right? I generated in Midjourney and I want to edit this. And I would go here. And this is AI, which is another AI, which is built into the Lightroom, where it's going to suggest styles which it thinks is suitable for this image, right? Of course, I can also start like editing, manually. And this is how I'm going to finish things and do this, right? But typically what I do is I start by going here, right? So, and I can select particular style. You can see how the sliders move, and I can apply the style 100%, or I can apply the style less. And the styles, let's like yet another AI, which is built now into photo editing, and often the styles, it's a very good starting point, and they give me ideas of how these images can look in a way. Actually, this is a nice one, right? which is different from what I would do. Okay, So even simply, editing with images already becomes a way to apply second AI. Okay, so this is, again, the series has hundreds of images, which is just a few in the garden. And then this is, maybe you remember a couple of months ago, Midjourney added zoom and a pen function. So when you start zooming out of the image, right, it's this amazing ability to get out from your original scene and to see more. But when you start zooming, you get this kind of effect, which in fact reminds me a bit of my early drawings, right? This theatrical world, which is kind of closed by itself, and now you're outside of this theatrical world, you're outside of this box. So that's what happens, right? So this world, which in my original drawing was like this, now becomes part of the frame, and you're outside. So some of the things I was into, this is another image where it happened, now kind of built into the software. Okay, so that's, let's say, one series. And then to choose something else. So again, right, I don't do these things because I have like an idea. I do these things because that's what like my mind or my body wants me to do. So it wants me to do this somewhat nostalgic scenes of winter. But I'm also thinking consciously a little bit because I can't turn this off. So I was thinking, how can I also deal with another limitation, another challenge of generative media, the fact that it's constantly evolving, and the level of realism, the level of coherence, the resolution is increasing every few months. So I realized, if I go for like top photographic realism, after a year or even half a year, these images may look a bit simplistic, they may look, right, a bit idiotic, which is what happens often when you work with new media. So I thought maybe as a way to combat it, I will simulate not photorealism, but I will simulate the look of, let's say, mid-20th century film, a kind of artistic cartoon, so a kind of techniques, maybe three-dimensional animation, which were quite popular. I mean, they're still popular, but were especially popular also in Eastern Europe in the 60s and 70s. When films from Russia, Hungary, Czech Republic would win all the international competition at Cannes and other festivals. So in my prompt, I would specify, like, I would say architecture set or diorama or panorama. I mean, it still looks kind of dated, right, because of small figures, but maybe it's okay, right? Because you do get this like 3D animation type of aesthetics. So this was done like a year, basically around a year ago. No, sorry, I'm lying. This was done around winter. So I'm looking at them and I still like them. And the content, again, it's also nostalgic, right? So it's another attempt to represent, let's say, perhaps my childhood, my teenage years, and there are these fragments, which are very characteristic also of generative media, which are partly a result of AI misunderstanding me, but I like it. So the way AI misunderstands you, the way it misunderstands the prompt sometimes, if you're clever, sometimes it's the most interesting thing about it. And you can see, like, I was quite happy that after some attempts, I was able to start getting these islands. So we do look somewhat like this island-like, thin-like, fetal-like scenes from early drawings. And there's obligatory iconography, which I associate with Russia, my childhood, which are telegraph poles and kind of fragments of reality. Okay, so let's see what else. Okay, then another winter. So in this case, so what another strategy, right? So what I'm doing here is I'm using Midjourney mostly because in Midjourney you actually don't have to give it a prompt. You can give it anywhere from 1 to 6, maybe even more, but I only tried 6 input images. So you give it different images, which you upload. Can be anything, can be your drawing, you know, social media photograph, historical photograph, 17th century engraving, anything you want. Even you can write a prompt or not. And sometimes I write prompts, sometimes not. And what I realized is that in many of these experiments, one among many images I give it, usually painting by Erasmus Bosch, right? Late 16th century Dutch artist, right? Very surreal, very dark, very dense. So you have this combination, right, of some socialist housing with some kind of Bosch imagery, and things get multiplied with maybe Bosch effect, and the space gets populated, right, with little figures, so perhaps miniatures, like almost like small models of a large world, which I also find interesting. So something like this, right? So you can say kind of Bosch winter, right? Bosch in USSR, perhaps you can call it. And again, there are hundreds of images, and then what I do is select some and edit on the Lightroom. And sometimes I come back to the same images over and over and do some small edits over the course of a few months. I haven't seen them printed yet, although people send me photographs of how my images look printed in some group exhibitions. But in 2 weeks, in 2 weeks, I'll be in Portugal, where the curator is preparing my exhibition, and some of these images will be printed 1 meter wide. So then I have no idea how they're going to look. What I've been doing to prepare for the exhibition is enlarging. I'm using gigapixel CI, and it will look good. Enlarge even 30 times, but I have no idea what will happen. Okay, not going to show everything, but maybe just a bit more. So then this is another series, also it's dealing with my childhood, teenage years. So I wanted to represent kind of people in the transport, like a subway. You all, maybe not all, but many of you heard or even seen a very beautiful kind of Baroque Moscow metro. So I was living next to a very beautiful line. In fact, the first line in the station of metro, or where we lived next to, was like built in 1935. And sometimes I would be also in a bus or trolley bus. So, to give it more atmosphere, in my prompt, I would also specify lighting. So typically, and somehow, I'm always compelled to use the same lighting parameters. So I would say, like in my prompt, February, 8 a.m., diffused, cold, side lighting. And then I would, put other things, and I would just say, people, going to work. And you get something, right, which is interesting. And of course, the way people look changes from one version of Midjourney to another. But in this version, again, this theatricality appears in a strange way. We can look like actors, right, who are playing perhaps in some Netflix movie about my childhood, right? So if I look at the photographs of how actually people look in my childhood, we look very different. And of course, the composition would not be so artfully arranged, right? It's amazing how well, how artistically powerful AI is, right? And it's obviously better when, in terms of artistic skills, when 99.99% of all artists or art students, only maybe students who get educated in China can compete in some professional illustrators. So what's interesting about these images, right? Yeah, there are some kind of Russian features, I think, here, although I'm not sure what they are. But when I look at them, when I show it to my friends, or my friends from Ukraine, who grew up in Ukraine or Latvia, look at them, they say, yeah, it looks exactly like my childhood, or like when I was growing up in the 90s, even though we don't look at all like the actual people on photographs. So obviously, AI is extracting some generic patterns, some characteristics from this masses of imagery it's exposed to, And it's, I think, playing some trick with our brain where we get something a bit generic, a bit stereotypical, a bit cliche, a bit even kitsch. Kitsch, actually, one of the meanings of kitsch is just non-original. And there's enough characterization, right? There's enough details. So it does look kind of believable. It looks realistic, right? There's enough of a realism effect, even though it's a complete simulation. And of course, what it can simulate, right? It's kind of historical fiction function, and that's why my show, one of the shows is called Unreliable Memory. The actual title I gave to curator was Unreliable Past, but we changed it to Memory. Never mind, is that there are much fewer images from this period, let's say in human cultural history on the web, when if I was trying to simulate some maybe American history of New York. So you get with historical fictions, but already last year I saw an announcement about a company in China, which like funeral company, which in addition to normal funeral services, would also offer you like kind of generative media video simulation of your deceased, grandmother or grandfather. So these tools now join our media tools. They had them the last 150 years, photography, film, various database and document technologies, microfiche, right? All the different technologies we had and disciplines developed around these technologies, digital heritage, etc., etc. So now we have this, let's say, emerging AI heritage, so to speak, or AI history field or a discipline where people will be able to recreate their past or imagine their past and soon perhaps make Hollywood-like movies using these tools. And of course, what we'll be getting will never be precise and may give them a false sense of certainty. This is from the same series. So I did some editing in Photoshop to play with colors a little bit, but I never changed composition. Right, this was all before generative field became available. With something almost like Caravaggio-like. I'm not saying this is like Caravaggio, but it's a composition with kind of dramatism and the lighting, right? Anyway, from the same series. And one thing is like, right, I didn't say anything but sleeping. So basically I just said in my prompt, people like in the metro, people like in a bus riding to work, 8 a.m. And I said Russia, like 1977, and in this version of Midjourney, like it put everybody to sleep for some reason, because I guess I assume that people like in this late communist society were so tired, we were all sleeping, but we were not as tired, but the things got a bit exaggerated. Okay? This was like a prompt especially by young people, and young people still were all put to sleep. So let's see. Marco, in terms of time, you want me to wrap up or a bit more, or Marco? Nobody here. You want me to show a bit more or finish
Lev,
up?
I would love to see some of your scene work and maybe talk about your architecture, like why it's so spatial, and if you can speak about those two things, that would be wonderful.
Okay. Marco, is Marco, do you hear me? Marco?
I think he's here. He's
Yeah, I hear you.
yeah.
I hear you.
Marco, yeah, I'm trying to call. Yeah, okay. How long? Okay, should I wrap up? Should I kind of wrap up, or should I wrap up?
I think we can slowly wrap up and
okay, yeah, okay, yeah, okay.
Open it for questions.
Okay. Let me I'll just show a few things. And will not speak as much. Yeah, okay. Just wanted to ask. Okay,
just on the phone here,
a bit more. Yeah.
the button.
Okay, just a few more, right? Okay, this is called drawing rooms. Okay, so I'll just allow myself 2 sentences per series. So here it's also attempt, right, to see how AI deals with imaginary history. The prompt will say something like young creatives or young artists, or in, I don't know, Seoul 2005 or Shanghai 1999. But the thing which really interests me the most here is all the stuff which AI generated, right? So as you can see, the stuff is covered with this kind of endless kind of still life, right? The still life, which covers everything, which grows. So this is, and you also get this interesting effect because as I specify, I thought I would specify medium in my prompts. I would say like very thin, diverse, intricate lines, drawn with pencils, etc., etc. But AI misunderstood me, so it basically used my description both for the medium, right? So it does look like it's drawn, or maybe combination of drawing and engraving, etching, but also with lines kind of and become part of the dimensional space. So you do get this. Yeah, Gustav, you only talk about space. There is this strange speciality, right? Where these lines are both in 2D and 3D. Okay, so that's one thing. And then let's see. And then this one is so here the idea was to generate some like half erased manuscripts, and of course AI writes in some non-existing language. Although now I think you can make it to write something, but it was the early version. So the project is called Library of Unwritten Manuscripts, and the idea is that I imagine a kind of library which has multiple buildings. So one building's, so there are no published books in this library. So one building has books for manuscripts which were kind of written, but then maybe out of fear of censorship or persecution, maybe erased or unfinished. And then another building would have kind of like manuscripts which people imagined, and maybe we took some notes, but we never wrote the whole manuscripts. And then the next building will have maybe manuscripts of some short stories, novels, architecture, designs, or films, which people like we basically told the idea to somebody, but again, because of the fear that if somebody knows, if you write it and somebody reads it, will go to prison, was never committed to paper. And the last building contains, and don't ask me how it's represented, but the last building contains the best, the most important, the most creative works of the arts in the history of humanity, which we never even imagined, right? Because we're people living in a particular condition, and because we thought I'll never get funding to do it, or I'll be arrested if I write down this idea, or like I'll go to prison or to labor camp if I tell this idea even to my colleagues. These ideas were very close to being imagined, but they never were imagined. So it's a library of various non-existent, unwritten, unrealized works, and maybe I think it was a desire for me to talk about these things. So this was maybe one of my earliest series. It's called Architecture for a Snow Planet. So again, a sense of theatricality, I think a sense of a stage in a play with both inside and outside. Again, very early version of Midjourney, not very high resolution, but I think I was able to capture a certain atmosphere, right? A certain sense of life, melancholy, a certain mood, and also this very typical artifacts, right? Always thin lines going around. So where the medium of generative media shows up itself, but I don't have anything, very profound to say about it. In fact, I don't think even though I had to talk because it was a talk, right? Maybe I would prefer to simply show you the images, but maybe I would just say one thing. which is my motivation for the series. My motivation was to represent some kind of interior space made from different kinds of snow. So I imagined 15 or 13 different kinds of snow, the snow which is 3 years old, 3 days old, and getting kind of dirty and very fresh snow, and the snow which falls in the moonlight, and the snow which falls in February and August. I was able to get something, not exactly what I wanted, but something. And maybe this is also, what is wonderful about this media, when it fails, when it misunderstands you, when it makes mistakes. So while for as a medium of mass communication, people, like the scientists in the industry, want to be precise, and every time a new version of the journey comes out, is described as more comprehensive, right? Where AI is able to understand it better, and same thing of DALL-E 3, and it's very important. Maybe for an artist such as myself, a medium which is pretends to be very powerful, but in reality is very limited. Medium which can do so many things and can do even more. A medium which resists, a medium which you can trick, is maybe the best thing which one can wish for. So I will stop here. So thank you. We can maybe have a discussion. That's it.
Thank you, Lev. This was a journey. But it was so good to see you, and thank you for your introduction. About the history and the contextualization, actually, of where we are today as a civilization. Let's say so. And I think that it's really important that you shared, this really early works. And really, my question is. It's banal, but I was curious all the time when I was listening to you and watching this, even though on a small screen on this phone. How do you, if you could discuss a little bit also, of course, the aesthetic dimensions of what is the AI created realities that you have been showing versus your early work. I mean, how do you see these two things connecting, and how does that work for you as an artist, really? Even though it was pretty clear that there is a very strong connection, the way you see it. But I'm curious about, where is actually this going? How can we actually contextualize both of these things?
Okay, sure. Let's see. I was going to show something. Let me just find something. If I find it, I will show. Just a moment. Maybe this is just a second. Okay. So, I have so many things. Sometimes it's a bit hard to. Okay. Just a moment. Well, I probably can't find it. Well, sorry. Just give me 1 second. This is no. Somewhere here it is, but where it is, I don't know. Okay. Well, what I was going to show you is that never mind. Yeah, what I was going to show you is so every few months I do this experiment, right? I take one of my drawings, and then I use the state-of-the-art AI tools, the journey or stable diffusion, and now I can use Photoshop generative fill to expand it, right? And to see how close AI can get to my own vision, to my own aesthetics. And I would say it's getting more and more close. It's not quite there yet. And I think the difference has to do with two things. So first of all, I think in terms of variety of line, textures, kind of patterns, shapes, and forms, like I have as a human, I have more variety. So when I look at it from a distance, If I look at the parts made by AI, they can look exactly like mine, but when I get closer, I can see that there is more repetition, there's more redundancy. So that's one thing, right? And the second thing is, I think it has to do with complexity of space. So it's still struggling with, right, kind of complex spaces. It's still struggling from unusual points of view. So if you look at, billions of AI images, right, out there on the web, it's mostly like things are kind of like a person looking at you head on, or with the object which is in the center. I mean, again, you can create it to create more complex compositions, but I think it struggles. And sometimes you get very interesting compositions with multiple figures, right? And with kind of complex space, but I would say it's more of a Italian Renaissance as opposed to Baroque, right? So it struggles with complexity, it struggles with multi-level spaces. So again, that's something you see. And then the third thing, which I mentioned, and as I said, it is the differences that it can make incredible variety of things, but these things are made from details which often are kind of generic, right? So the trees look like some kind of prototypical, tree, but it's not the average tree, right? The tree looks like some exaggerated, right? Crowd pleasing, kind of child, I don't know, kindergarten, fairy tale tree, right? So it makes this, right? It makes this very complex worlds, but sometimes when you look, it's like almost these worlds are made from like Lego blocks, as opposed to the actual details. But it is, a bit difficult to talk about it because, it's powers, right, increase, every day, every hour, every second, and it also depends on, what it is you want. And also, nobody is doing systematic experiments, right? Nobody's doing systematic experiments with medium. So imagine this huge latent space, right, which is capable of, infinity, and then everybody is kind of exploring this part, or maybe some people do something here, right? Like imagine you have a planet like Earth, and imagine aliens, land on the Earth, and they just spend like all the time within like 5 meters of a spaceship, and they say, that's it, this is what this planet is about. So we actually don't know what generative AI is capable of, right? We kind of have no idea because nobody is doing systematic experiments, even the scientists. And another thing I want to say about the aesthetics. So mathematically, first of all, nobody fully understands what the systems learn, including the AI scientists. I had conversation with some scientists who actually work in the labs where this technology was invented. We don't know. There are debates about it. But one thing we know is that mathematically speaking, the number of sentences, the number of images, the number of different things you can get out of this network, it's infinite. It's basically infinite, and which to me is perhaps the most interesting thing. So this is the last thing I want to say. You asked me so I'm making these images, right? I'm enjoying it. It's both, very pleasant and frustrating, like any creative process. I will have 2 exhibitions, so it's all fine. But I kind of have a sense that this is not what I should be doing, right? And in this kind of manifesto I published on social media, I think last week, which some people like, I think I compared making images with AI or writing text with AI to taking Boeing 777 around the corner to have a coffee. We have this superhuman technology. We train the network to have this latent space, which contains, potentially everything which was ever created, potentially, and everything we can ever create and more, right? With literally infinite number of images, infinite number of sentences, infinite number of skills inside. And all we're doing is just making single images, including me. So while it's very entertaining and satisfying, and you can get shows, right? And you probably have a career. To me, right, it's like a bit limiting. So I kind of go back to this idea, right, to my article, which I published in 1999, which was called Avant-Garde Software, where I said, the most important or most amazing artwork done with the internet itself, right? The web itself is the most amazing artwork because we never had anything like this. And its scale, its complexity, its dynamism is beyond anything we have ever seen. So while people can make little net art pieces, it's besides the point, right? And I think I can maybe only repeat the same thing today, but while I'm using this as my artistic instrument, as my artistic studio, it's that's what it was designed for, right? It was designed as a tool to make these creative things or to make media. Basically, we're using this system to make traditional art, right? We're using the systems to create sentences, to write little poems, to write, cover letters, to make images, to make movies. Why? Like in other words, you're asking the God to give you a bicycle, right? You should ask the God to give you something we never had before. But what it is, I don't know. So this is my answer. Okay. So yeah, aesthetics is kind of basically it's irrelevant, right? It's like you're painting your house and you're asking, Zeus or Apollo, okay, Mr. Zeus, which color shall I use here for my wall? It's like he says, okay, use this, light gray color. But it's like idiotic, right? You understand? So that's what I want to say. Well, so we don't quite know what to do with it.
There is actually a question around about the manifesto in the chat. You can maybe continue.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Well, I think I just addressed
You sort of answered in a way.
I sort of answered, right? Well, I'm being a bit provocative, right? But my point is that well, I guess. But let me answer now, right? So I think I remember like in the early days of so the kind of golden age of net art, right? Like 97, 99, was this artist Hugh Bunting, right? And he made this. I may not be able to precisely to explain it, right? But he made this artwork where basically it was a web page, which I think was about him, his artistic statement of biography, and every single word was hyperlinked, right? So every single word in this web page led to that website. So it was very simple work, but it was very powerful because it kind of performed for us the hyperlinked nature of web, right? So, and I think there are also other works of net artists at the time, right? Some of them, which very successfully kind of performed, right? Kind of staged almost in a circus-like atmosphere, right? Exaggerated and made very visible the new characteristics of the web, right? And so I think what I would like to do is I would like to be able to create works with generative media, which would stage, kind of perform, make visible, dramatize the new nature of this media. The fact that it's like this monster, so to speak, right? It's like millions of art assistants, right, at once, but it's very flexible and very stubborn at the same time, right? It's capable of creating endless number of different scenes, and yet it also prefers to speak in generalities sometimes, right, and cliches. And the fact that you write this prompt and you change one word and everything changes, right? And the fact that nobody can even mathematically, including its creators, explain to us or to themselves what it is, and yet it's working, right? So I kind of want to perform this instrument. And I think that simply making like what I showed you, I'm very happy, right? It's wonderful, but I don't think that's enough. So that's what I want to say. So then was the question about to address copyright concerns. I have nothing interesting to say about it. So everybody else is addressing these concerns, so I don't like to repeat what other people do. I think that the companies, got the message, and the Google and Meta and OpenAI, they're trying to create, I think, or at least we're saying that we're trying, but I think we are trying to create different mechanisms. We definitely don't want to be, taken out of business. Maybe it is, some not watermarks, right, but some embedded information, or maybe it is, people can maybe mark their images with penalties for training. Yeah, I mean, we saw industry, very actively responding to that. Just as a few years ago, the industry very actively responded to when people said, "Look, you guys are using all this biased data sets." Doesn't mean that it's going to be solved overnight, but I think if society puts enough pressure on the industry, many things do get solved. Like everybody was worried at the 90s about, well, maybe nobody will understand me now about, the millennium bug. But people thought that like everything is going to explode because the computers, will not be able to advance like the clock past, December 31st, 1999. But these bugs were fixed and everything was okay. So I'm kind of optimistic. I'm optimistic that the copyright issue, will be solved. And another thing about copyright is that I think what's more interesting is the issue of like art school admissions. So I reposted a very interesting article from a few days ago. I think it was in Art News, where we interviewed people in different art schools, saying what is your policy about allowing students to use AI. So well, people can use AI, but we have to label it, or students can use AI, but we can't make references to any like existing brands or designer names or artist names. But of course, it is also interesting because the whole history of human culture is the history of copying, is the history of repetition, right? It's the history of, you learn from a master, you apprentice. Let's say you are a famous artist, so the artists around you are going to make copies. In fact, if you look at Bruegel, right, for example, a very individualistic, very unique artist, but it was a whole family, and they would create images, they would create versions of his compositions, and people knew what were versions of his compositions, and they would be priced about maybe 20 to 30%, right? So we were not priced in the same way, but not priced as 1%. So in fact, throughout the human history, we humans have had a more sophisticated understanding about the regionals and variations. But I think, since the beginning maybe of Romantic period or kind of modernism, this idea that every artwork, every design has to be unique, and it's all being created anew, this kind of false idea of uniqueness, I think kind of creates these complications. Let's see what other questions. So which questions I want to address? Yes. So Caro, as we feed and train machine learning recursively, will this lead to positive feedback that reinforces certain visual styles over others? Well, it's kind of already happening, right? So I think that, for example, in the case of Midjourney, we do use so-called reinforced machine learning, right? So when the new version of Midjourney is about to be released, they kind of put images out there, and then people evaluate these images, right? It can give them scores. Even this is used in kind of fine-tuning or training the model. So whatever it is community likes, it gets reinforced as the new static default, right? So I think this is already happening. Waiver, this mechanism by itself is enough to lead to a certain monoculture. That's it's a very hard question, which I think nobody can answer. The discussions about, let's say, cultural globalization and potential danger of monoculture started already like late 80s, and it's very easy, right, to point towards some science of it, but it's also very easy to point to some science of cultural diversification. Like for one thing, I mean, you can say, 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, you go to the record store, there's like, I don't know, X number of records, but now you go to online record store, there's like, millions of records. Maybe some of you remember discussions about the tail, the so-called tail effect, right? In the shape of distribution, maybe like the distributions of popularity are becoming like long tail, right? Sorry, discussion about long tail, right? Whether long tail becomes longer or not. But when the evidence is still out, right? In other words, there's enough evidence which says, well, because of various digital processes, digital economy, the economy of taste, or recommendation systems, or search engines, right? Because of all these mechanisms, the cultural diversity is decreasing. But there is also evidence which says, well, precisely because of all these mechanisms, the cultural diversity is increasing. In fact, a couple of years ago, Spotify published internal research, which we can't verify because it was internal research. But they said, well, actually, we've been tracking what kind of people listening to Spotify over the course of a few years, and on the average, people listen to more different tracks of more different people. So in other words, the average listening becomes more diverse over time. But it's very hard to do this research. So the evidence is hard to come by. But I think that because I'm asked this question all the time, and because I'm asking this question myself all the time, now I'm basically trying to look. Basically, what I'm looking for a way out, right? I'm trying to find a way out from this dichotomy where we think about digital culture in terms of we're like kind of going towards monoculture and the decreasing diversity, or increasing diversity, right? So kind of trying to think how we can avoid this dimension and think about other things. So if I one day figure it out, I will tell you for sure. Because ultimately this question it's impossible to answer. It's impossible there is no objective way to measure, because of course diversity can refer to lots of different dimensions. And maybe there's a different way to think about it. Okay, so what are the next challenges that you foresee for artists using AI? Well, Gustavo is always has very good questions, but I don't know if I can answer quickly. I think my talk was an attempt to answer some of his questions.
Well, Lev, just briefly, I really enjoyed your talk. I think mostly I just wanted to get to the core of, since you have led this field and really thinking theoretically and coming together with art, what do you foresee as kind of this next territory?
Okay. Well, okay, sure. Well, I think that so in terms of text, right? I think the best thing is not to read some philosophical theoretical text. The best thing is to read the computer science papers, which actually describe this technology. They're not very easy to read, but some of them are easier than others. Like I'm able to read them, but I do skip the math. I can probably figure out the math, but I get kind of bored, right, to understand it. But I read like introduction, I read conclusion. To kind of read the foundational text which describe these models. So that's kind of my approach, is to understand how these things work under the hood. So that's one thing. The second thing, what I'm interested in is the interface to these tools. So right now the interface is kind of text-based, right? You describe what it is you want. So, depending on the tool, depending on the version, it can be like very kind of short condensed text, or the text can be longer. But for example, in my case, last few months, I don't use any text. I just give it images to weights. So this image 1, this image 1.2, this image. So I kind of manipulate it in this way, and I get this remix of references, styles, historical atmospheres in media. So I think what we're going to expect, right? So I think in terms of representational capacities, right? I think here's what I think we're going to have, right? First of all, this is very early, right? So I think DALL-E, right? We discovered, in fact, that this network has this image capacities. It was 2020, so this is just 3 years. I mean, Midjourney is released like July of last year. This is very, very early, right? So we will see some amazing, unprecedented, I think, capacities emerging in the next few years. And what people are doing now with tools will look as idiotic as, sorry to say, as, let's say, as childish as all this artwork people have done of guns like 5 years from now, okay? Including mine. But I have right? So that's why like I can look my images look like different artistic styles. I don't go for photorealism in the hope it will survive, but I don't know. So I look at my drawings from 45 years ago, they look okay. When I look at drawings done like 4,000 years ago by humans, they look okay. But we know the new media has this illness, right? Where it just always looks terrible after 5-10 years, or sometimes 5 months. Anyway, but here's one more thing. Here's what we're going to get. Oh yeah, I have this question. Do you anticipate gallery career? Kathy, I have an answer for you, so don't leave. So I think we can think, okay, this is a good idea. Okay, so we can think, just got thought about something. So we can think about history of art and history of media in terms of this, let's say, 2 kind of modes, among other things. One mode is you basically create images and you edit images by pieces, right? If I draw something with pencil, I draw something, I erase it, I have this control. Well, if I take photograph, right, analog photograph, I take the whole photograph, like I can't really edit it by pieces, right? Like I was able to manipulate things in the darkroom, but only when the computer showed up with its modularity, right, according to Lev Manovich, that book, right, this editability, right, with control over parts became possible, right? And then we saw more and more control over parts, right? So Photoshop introduced like layers. So now the image is made of layers. And then, now Photoshop and Lightroom have this masking techniques where you can automatically find a face, you can automatically find common types of objects, you can select them, you can automatically find sky, and that's actually due to AI, right? So you can automatically, so before you had to outline this mask, and then if you want to change the sky, if you want to change the something, but now you can automatically create this mask, right? So this quest for modular media, right, is like a very strong, I think, tendency, right? A very strong tendency in the history of digital media. And then we get this AI, where you basically write a prompt, right? And you get this whole image, and of course you can change the prompt, but especially in the beginning, up until I think DALL-E 3, you can keep changing the prompt, but you still get the same thing because it basically reacts to what's in the beginning of prompt. So it's almost like we get this photograph, right, where we get the whole thing and we can change it. So we get this representational power or imaginative power, right? But we lose in modularity and editability. But I think like I forgot who, because there have been so many announcements, right, in the last few weeks, so like I can't keep track. I think some of these companies are starting to introduce new versions of these tools where some of this editability is coming back. So, for example, I mean, you can also find this in science papers. So for example, you generate some product shot over some background. You can just tell the AI, okay, now change the background, but keep a product, and I think, et cetera, et cetera. So I think eventually, over the next a year or 2 years, we will get this new media where maybe we can say, okay, keep it but change the lighting, like keep it but change the details. It kind of works right now, but a bit awkwardly. So that's the next thing. Now, what would be also amazing if we can change point of view. You can say, okay, now look at the scene, but from here. So right now the camera control, I mean, you can say like high, low, but it's a bit approximate. So what we have, is we have now, a bit of a dichotomy between, let's say, photography, where you can control things by setting up a scene, right? But once you set up a scene, you capture the image, and then if you want to edit it, it is still a painstaking process. You have to select this mask, although the AI got easier. Or again, AI is the same thing. It's like this virtual photography, right? Where like you write a prompt, you get this image, which may be amazing, but it's hard to change it. Versus manual drawing, manual painting, right? Where you can have amazing control. But let's say it takes a professional manga artist, maybe professional manga artists can only make like one and a half manga pages, in one day. So it takes a very long time, right? So, or think about computer graphics, computer animation, where it takes still days, right, to model something. So what people, I think, want is to achieve, some kind of combination of these facilities. And then in terms of more like artistic use, what I would say is the genetic media is very relevant to all of culture industry, and it's kind of relevant to art. Because art is not about images, right? Art is about concepts, art is about projects, art is about ideas, art is about dealing with issues, or whatever it is, artists do these days. Art is about installations. Yeah, of course, if you you can write your artist statement using this thing, but it's more or less irrelevant to contemporary art, because contemporary art is not about art anyway. I mean, it's about other things, right? It's about projects, it's about ideas or ideologies, etc., etc. So it's really not about media, right? And that's why this thing is called generative media. Of course, some people will make interesting interactive installations where you'll be talking to this, agents. And most people will make awful installations. It's always the case, right? So Waiver will have a general AI, right? So some of these top AI scientists say, well, actually, what we're seeing is beginning of general AI. This is the general purpose AI. We thought general purpose AI will arrive 2028 and 2030, but it's a bit early. Even people say, but how can you say that? You just have a system which simply learns associations between words, right? It just simply says, but if I write this word, the next word will be this, and the next word will be this. This is not thinking, right? This is not human consciousness. But maybe it is, right? Maybe human consciousness is based on this extremely simplistic mechanism. I mean, I've had some very interesting conversations with some science people in the last few weeks. So maybe the general purpose AI does have this kind of idiotic, right? Kind of like almost mechanism which is shocking in its simplicity. Because I also saw the article which says, well, actually, in terms of how humans and AI compress information and how they represent information, they're saying, well, maybe actually with networks I'm more powerful in a certain sense. So hard to say, hard to say. Okay, so was a question from a very old friend. I hope one day Kefi and me will meet somewhere in person. I'm sorry I didn't come to Vilnius. I didn't realize until like last moment that you guys were all going to Vilnius, and it was too late for me to change my plans. And I was like, oh, I want to be in Vilnius for my friends. So sorry about that. So could you anticipate the gallery careers exhibiting artists? You know, I kind of had, I mean, I'll be honest, right? I had these ideas last year. So I thought maybe like now with AI is where, and there's like millions of young people, writing about digital media, and you have, very nice, very decent articles like everywhere, art forum, and I don't need to do it. And maybe I can try that, but maybe just my bad luck. But look, I'm having good experience when people invite me to be part of a group show. Like, okay, give us the images. Here's the images. We'll print them. You're done. But I hope my curators don't listen to me. But I'm preparing now these 2 personal shows, which will open in the next 2 months, and I don't know. It's very stressful. It's very frustrating. There's lots of details, and different levels of professionalism, and it's just lots of work. And I had a talk to a few fellow artists in the last few weeks. One was 33, one was 48, one was like 82. I said, Lev, but it's always like this. I mean, if you want to show a project, your art project, in the physical space in the way you want, it's always a struggle, just because there are other people involved. I'm like, yeah, but this is why exactly I didn't become an artist in my late 20s, because I didn't want to struggle. I thought I'm not strong enough to do it. And that's why I told in the beginning, I kind of cheating out, so to speak, right? I became an academic who thought instead of making these things, I can just like write about them. And then instead of even sending my articles to the journals, I can just put them online. And it is very seductive, right? Because I have my social media, I have my followers, have an idea, write about it, and you're kind of done, and you can make a book. And of course, doing MIT Press books is also stressful because you're also dealing with collections of people, and not everything goes right, but you don't do it all the time. So after my experience, it's sort of funny, right? I wanted to have these exhibitions. The idea will lead to other things. And at this moment, I just want these exhibitions to open, and I don't want to have ever exhibitions again because it's been so stressful. And I do find that the art world, well, you guys know, right? It can be smart and stupid. It can be interesting and immoral. It can be wonderful and awful. And I'm not sure I have patience for it, anymore. I'm not sure I have patience to deal with it. So we'll see kind of what happens after the shows. Maybe something will happen. Maybe I'll get some interesting offers. But if nothing happens, I think I'll be more than happy just to continue, doing my experiments and, publishing my ideas. And ultimately, what I think I care about is conversation and discussion. So for images, I'm sharing online, generate discussion. And sometimes we do, sometimes on Facebook, but also LinkedIn, not so much on Instagram. And so for me, maybe my images, it's like another way to generate a discussion. I'm kind of happy. So to answer the Kefi question is, I'm open, right? I think it kind of depends, right? If the world wants me to do, if the world wants me to have it, I'm open. But I'm not going to push for it. And we'll see.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Lev, before we wrap up, Sahar
Sure.
is actually my colleague. She has her hand up, and there's
Sure,
one more question
yes.
in the chat.
Sure.
Thanks, Gustavo. Hello, Lev.
Hi.
Thank you for your great talk and also sharing your memories and beautiful work with us. I have a few questions, but I'm going to ask two of them. One is about academic institutions and research and practice. So as you know, many of us, similar to you, are artists, scholars, and creative technologists, and we could end up in many different scholarly fields.
Yes, yes.
And actually, in fact, I'm doing a presidential postdoctoral fellowship in your previous institution at Arts, working with Ricardo Dominguez and Memo Acton. And so I'm wondering your transition from that institution, from the visual arts department to a computer science department, how impacted, if it did, your scholarly work, your art practice, how the reception of your work has been different, and its implication in your artwork, and also the scholarly and educational freedom, intellectual freedom that you have in the two different institutions in comparison to one another. And I also have another question about teaching in the age of AI. And, you know, as we all know, the educators have been freaking out over the access of the students to generative AI and to ChatGPT. And, you know, the type of classes that they had, the exercises that they don't quite work anymore. Many of those, you know, homeworks, many of those things that they designed, the exercises as part of their curriculum, doesn't work as well in theoretical fields and mathematical fields, computer science, history. I think in any of these directions, there needs to be some sort of revision of curricular design. And I'm wondering, what is your vision towards the new ecosystem of teaching and learning, and also how, as educators, we can embrace these technologies and modify the courses and potentially use them as teaching toolkits.
So, you know, I'm lucky. I only have to teach once a week. So my class actually going to start half an hour. So I was hoping I'll be done by now and I have time to rest, but it's okay. I miss what I do, right? I mean, I love discussion, so don't worry. So I'll have to make sure my answer doesn't take more than half an hour, because otherwise my students will show up. What? Okay. So two answers. One is so this article in Art News, which I think very recent. So I shared it on my social media. So it talks about various policies, which some like art or design schools are actually instituting in terms of student use of AI and also use of AI in portfolio. And I asked our friends, we said, well, we're having meetings. So again, I think there's a variety of reactions, and all I can do is like read this article, so ask people. I don't teach any art, design, and creative students, so I don't have direct experience. But I think that there has been many, well, not similar, but many technological challenges over the years. So this article, somebody talks about some sculptural technique, which was also questioned. I mean, in the 80s, there was a debate whether students can use calculators. And then also, let's say, the exams, so the assignments had to be changed around the use of calculators. And I think something similar happened probably with Wikipedia. In fact, I have a master's student in Moscow. It's the only student I have. I don't have any students in my present university because I'm computer science. I encourage her to work on thesis which will talk about like different common ideas which surround which basically surround the development and the acceptance of creative media today, about democracy, loss of job, et cetera, more creativity, less creativity, how these ideas are similar, different to parallel moments in the history of culture technology, such as the arrival of Photoshop in the 90s, the arrival of web, the arrival of Wikipedia in the 2000s, the arrival of photography. So what's interesting is like which of these moments, right, are similar, which of these moments are different. And I think when these moments happen, it always looks like it's the biggest revolution which humanity ever had, and then until the next revolution arrives. So I think the society will figure it out, and some people will have to relearn, and some people will be very frustrated, and some people will lose jobs, and other people will get jobs, right, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of my own, but it is like I personally like when things get messy, right? I like when things become like completely like unclear. So that's why I kind of like, for me, this is the best moment. Like I love it, right? I love it that it is so messy. In terms of my own practice, so I was at CSD and I was there for 16 years. So I kind of helped build this program with a few hundred visual art students, which was wonderful. And then I was lucky to be able to set up my lab, which was partly supported by California Institute for Telecommunication Information. We provided the space and administrative support. I learned how to write grants, and it was amazing. I mean, I was able to draw on computer science students, and I was able to draw on art students. And it was like the best years of my life. And we created like 40 projects and got 11 grants in a few years, and kind of created a new little field. And when I took a job in New York, and when I realized, it took me years to realize where I landed, and actually I wasn't able to do anything professionally at a new job. It's a very small university. It's just one building. It's a very traditional one, psychology, sociology, etc. And there's no programs in art design, architecture. There's nothing. If students from our programs have to take my class, we have to get permission. And the computer science department, which I am kind of a very traditional one. So they said if I want to have students, we need to have already BA in computer science. So as a result, I think I basically travel, I give lectures, all right, but actually I wasn't able to do anything at all. At my university, I have no students where I don't think we know that they exist. No faculty member or no graduate students came to talk to me like in the last 5 years. So it's kind of frustrating that they pay me a very good salary but not using me. But that's how it is. So I get my freedom. So I'm very happy when I'm invited to do things in our art, design, architecture schools. Like a few days I'll be doing a workshop in the architecture program in Innsbruck. And I hope it's maybe not the end of my journey, but that's how it is. So I guess what I learned from this is maybe it was a bit. What I learned from this, I don't know. Well, I mean, I have other colleagues. I know a few people who also have jobs in computer science departments, but maybe it worked out. But I think in my case, I kind of took this job because at this point I thought I was not interested in the arts anymore. I was interested in digital humanities, and I thought it was going to be a perfect job for me because I'll be like inside computer science and doing things with humanities people, but actually not having any art context at all turned out to be too much. So maybe the change was too much. Anyway, it's working for me. I mean, I'm making this art, right? I'm having exhibitions and publishing book, but it would be also nice to be able to do some things on my own campus. But it just doesn't work because also it's a very small school, but incredibly bureaucratic. And like when I was at UCSD, they say, guys, I have incredible idea, I have crazy idea. We said, great. how much money do you need to get started? I mean, it was also hard, but basically we're like, okay, we're going to break the rules, make possible for you to do something. And here, like, okay, what are rules and you can't do anything? It's like basically, so after I try to, push here and there, after a number of years, I just give up. So, so I basically teach my class, get my paycheck, and that's it. So sorry to not telling you some more interesting story, but sorry for not, but I can't make up for something if that makes it. So one definitely has to be very careful when one chooses the job to make sure that the job you take does more or less correspond to one's identity.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, it's like a relationship, right? It's like, you don't want to go out with just anybody.
Yeah.
Okay.
All
so
right.
That's it. Okay.
Lev, thank you so much. This
Very welcome.
We could go on and on. I think
Yeah, we can go on, but
which really means which really means that we have to do it again, and maybe in a even more structured way than the seminar, because there's so much to discuss these days. Okay. Well, I thank everybody for attending.
Yeah, thanks everybody for coming, and thank you to Gustavo. Thank you to Kevin. Great to hear you. Great to get your questions, and hopefully see you guys somewhere on this little planet. And I have to say, the world is. I think that's what Shakespeare. That's what Shakespeare said. The world is a stage. I think Shakespeare has performed beautifully, and maybe I was a bit naive to think that it can be otherwise. But as long as we stay true to our beliefs, ideas, and play, participate, and everybody does what we can do, and just hopefully convey our values to the next generation. I think humanity will survive, even though the amount of stupidity seems to be increasing. But I think maybe it's simply social media which is showing it, right? And between the conflict in Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and what's also happening in Israel, this is not the most proud moment of humanity, but maybe it was always like this, and maybe we just didn't see it as much. So art will continue, but I have to say we have created this monster, which is this AI. Nobody asked us to create it. We have created, and it's in some ways it's beyond anything I've seen in my life, right? The web was already tremendous, and we managed to survive and can have our careers and our relationship and our lives with the web, and it can really enable us, I think, to flourish mostly. But now this monster, I don't know what will happen, because we don't really need computers to make art. We already have way too many artists. We don't need art. We don't need to have as many human artists. We don't have millions of artists. We already have too many. Why do we need AI to make art, right? Maybe we need AI to help us do something else, find good artists, find, I don't know, or tell bad artists not to do it, or, or something else, right? We kind of need to find new functions of this AI, and making art is actually completely irrelevant anyway. That's what I want to say. So see you guys all in the next round of this. Thank you so much. Ciao.
Absolutely. Thank
you,
you,
Lev.
Lev.
Thank you.
So much.